with the rise of AI, the rise of agentic systems, every single vendor in the world is saying agentic, autonomous, AI-powered. And we felt like it would be useful to have some kind of framework to place these different claims on a scale. Hi, I'm Dan Faulkner, and I'm the CEO of SmartBear.
And I'm Bridget Smith, VP of Product Management for AI at SmartBear.
And today we're going to be talking about levels of autonomy in software development.
Dan, we've been hearing a lot about levels of autonomy. Could you talk a little bit about your perspective of what are those levels? Why are they relevant for the industry and particularly for developers and testers?
So some people may be aware that for some years now, people have talked about levels of autonomy in the automotive industry. And at level one, very simply, you can imagine, the humans doing most of the control of the vehicle. It might have kind of cruise control and a couple of bells and whistles. At level three, we might have a car that has lane assist, or it might have intelligent cruise control that keeps you a safe distance from the car in front. Maybe blind spot detection or automatic braking if you're about to reverse out into a passing vehicle, those kinds of things. But the car's actually taking control of the vehicle to a certain degree. And then at level 5, we have Waymo. So literally there is no driver. You jump in the back and hope that it gets you to the destination that you want to go to. So we thought that that could be a useful analogy to bring in to the software realm, and we saw that you could actually apply it quite well to coding. Whereas, at level 1, we used to sit and type lots of code manually, and then we had, autocomplete, and then we had the first version of Copilot, and then we have things like Claude Code, which can complete quite abstract and large modules, and then you even have tools like Devon, that's kind of functioning as a junior engineer in your team, that really is quite a high level of autonomy. And that's really encompassed all coding, including even kind of a lot of the testing.
You haven't talked as much about the testing. Seems like that may be lagging a bit. What do you think is making that come later than the Devons of the world?
It's a very difficult task to automate. So even in the pre-AI SDLC, non-code-based testing was a bottleneck in the process. So it was carried out generally by people. You'd have manual testers, teams of manual testers. And then, one level up from that, you'd have some intelligent automation. You might have tools that help you, do a screen recording of a manual test and then turn that into an automated test. You also have these kind of open source frameworks that will help you capture and automate some of the application level testing, but it didn't really get much beyond that. And there's a real need. There's the gap that was there has now become kind of insurmountable in the face of this tidal wave of software that's being developed much, much, much more quickly. And that's going to create a real business problem. But, you're asking me lots of questions politely here, but you're actually working on this stuff yourself.
Yeah.
So maybe you could share a bit about, as we think about the levels of autonomy for non-code-based testing, how would you sort of perceive that ladder progressing?
Definitely, I would agree that it's been a slower progression. Starting to see, and at individual customers, we're seeing team by team, code base by code base, different levels of autonomy. Certainly, for the more legacy large code bases, a lot harder to get some of these AI-based coding tools effectively working. And that's where I think the new capabilities are really going to revolutionize some of the QA side of things, and the testing side is to be able to get to that point where you're able to be much more natural in the interaction, and your team of agents can then come and help offload a lot of the rote discovery and healing the tests, and the button just got moved and renamed, and you don't want to have to go through and manually change 200 tests.
What does level 3 and level 4 or even level 5 start to look like? How can you tell that you're moving up the ladder?
Yeah. So as we think about level 3, I would tend to say that becomes much more where some of the systems are able to be a little bit more proactive. So where you start seeing self-healing tests. So you've already defined the outcome, the desired, what the test is supposed to be doing, and the steps to have those start to self-heal is in that level 3 area. As you start getting into level 4 and level 5, it will be much more. In level 4, I would want to be able to say, hey, we just added a whole new section to the application related to the updating profiles. So go ahead and particularly pay attention there, find out the new stuff, or we've just added the ability to add some integrations, make sure that that's working appropriately. And then the level 5 in that sort of Waymo world, it's much more giving the objective of make sure that this is continuing to deliver the value that I wanted to in this travel application, and it would then be able to keep an eye on the new releases and ensure that the functionality is still giving users what they need, again, in that end application.
And so you mentioned teams of agents there, which is a pretty interesting idea. How might those coordinate to solve the problem that you're talking about at the higher end there? And are they just doing what people would do?
So there's certainly a fair amount of analog, and part of what we think is going to make the end solutions work more effectively is by having some level of specialization, to have something have an agent that is really good at having the overall view and determining intent, and then being able to set specific tasks, like tell another agent, go explore and understand more about what the application does over here. Go run these particular tests, and we can have agents that are very good at that sort of following the instructions and execution, and not getting overly creative, really kind of following through, where the more creativity and understanding intent can be then delegated to another agent.
Is there a world in which people just kind of set it and forget it, hand this over to a black box system, or do you think humans kind of stay involved in this?
Yeah, I definitely think that humans stay involved. I think that what we're doing is really looking at ways that some of the more rote capabilities can be very much handed off and automated, but there's always going to be that space for a human to bring intuition into the process, and does that feel right? Can I figure that out by looking at it? In some ways, it's cheating to say, this is what the application should do, can it do it? It's a very different thing to be able to look at it and say, could I figure that out on my own? And that's something I think that humans can really, so I expect it to be an evolution of the human role as opposed to set it, forget it.
Yeah, and sometimes the human's just going to want to say, like, look over here, focus on this bit, right? This bit's important.
Yeah.
I want you to. So, like, how close are we to those kinds of capabilities that you've just been describing? Going and figuring out what an application does, building out the tests and running the tests, or orchestrating it all together.
I think, and from what I've been seeing in our labs, I'd say that that's closing very quickly. We're going to start to see some of the initial benefits that can be reached through higher autonomy in non-code-based testing. Now through early in next year, I think we're going to really start to see that take off. Even before AI started accelerating code development, there was already a testing gap that has now widened into more of a chasm. And so that is a strong pull. And I would also say that the technology is at a point where it is possible. And there are the same kinds of techniques that have been applied to development and code, writing of code and writing of code-based unit tests. Similar sorts of techniques can be applied to autonomous testing. And so from I think when Flashlight first came out and was really able to give you XY coordinates on a screen, that really started to unlock. I think that was the big unlock.
So you mentioned one thing that I thought was pretty interesting earlier, which was this idea of self-healing, and maybe you alluded to it too, but let's spend a couple of minutes on that. What does it mean for a test to be self-healing? Why is it important in autonomous testing?
One of the things about the more old-fashioned automated testing, is that things were often very tied to a specific DOM element or a name of something on a screen. And as we know, code evolves quickly and changes, and so as the button gets renamed, as the menu gets reordered, as things move around on the screen, those things cause the more traditional kinds of test automation to break. They're very brittle. And that can have a cascading effect throughout a whole series of tests, causing a lot of humans to have to do a lot of mundane work. And so when we start talking about self-healing, it's the ability to say, I have a series of steps, but have enough understanding and be able to take advantage of Vision AI and LLM's ability to understand what the step is trying to accomplish and just say, oh, well, it said log in on the test, but now it says sign in. I know those are pretty much the same thing.
Right. In the old way, the brittle tests, you keep having to go back and redo the tests every time the code changes, every time the app is updated. You've got to go rebuild that set of tests, which means you can't expand the testing that you're doing. There's another thing that I like a lot that we've discovered with some of our more recent innovations, which is automating off natural language. So one of the things that I think is kind of a hidden gem when you start doing that, at least the way our team's done it, is being able to take a single set of tests and propagate them across your web app into iOS, into Android. We don't care what form factor or operating system or browser you're running on, because we're working off the intent of the tests as written in English. And again, if you compare that to some of the older testing formats, you've got to have one set of tests for your web app, a different set of tests for your Android app, a different set of tests for your iOS app. So now, not only do you have to go and redo your tests every time the app changes, you have to go and redo your tests 3 times every time your app changes. And so it just becomes really clunky and unmanageable and slows you down. So to me, that's just a very kind of elegant way to keep pace a little better, just take another half rung up the autonomy ladder.
And one other thing I would kind of piggyback there, I think one of the things as we see the automated testing going, autonomous testing going up that ladder, is somewhat the broadening of the understanding of intent. Yes. So it starts with the understanding of sort of a step-by-step, what does this step mean? Is it a button? How do I do it? But there starts to be a broader and deeper understanding of the application that can then open up to understand the fact that perhaps your mobile app has a slightly different flow. Yeah. But that's okay because there's an understanding. And so as that understanding of intent, that ground truth starts to expand, as systems are able to take multiple sources of those. Oh, there's some functionality that's defined in a PRD, and there's some functionality that has been captured in some existing tests, and there's some exploration that just was perhaps undocumented, but it's in the code base. Those things now start to come together and unlock, again, more and more autonomy in testing.
You use the phrase ground truth there, which is pretty interesting, because I think one of the impacts that we've seen with more autonomous coding is that we lose track a bit of what's been built. So if we take an extreme example, one of these vibe coding tools where I can just go in and type in a single sentence prompt, say, build me an app that does X. It could achieve that, but because I've given it such a high level instruction, I'm giving it a lot of autonomy to make some decisions on its own about what exactly it needs to do to solve the high-level request I've given it. And that means when it gives me the finished application, I'm not actually sure what's in there. And it's creating this post-development validation step. And one of the things that I found interesting about these teams of agents that we've developed that are crawling the applications is we can start to answer that question as well. We actually can capture what's been built. And so one of the things that's been really intriguing to me is as you move up the autonomy ladder, there are new processes or reordering of steps that are happening, whether we like it or not. So at level 1, you have a functional spec and a person codes what's in the functional spec. Level 5 or 4, you give it this high level idea of what you want, it creates the application, and then you've got to actually almost kind of retrofit a functional spec onto what's been built. So with that in mind, as we think about non-code based testing and the autonomy ladder, are the same processes going to work, or are we going to have to kind of reorder or rethink how testing should be done?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a place where having that team of agents becomes a really critical architectural decision, because you can start to say, I have this ground truth of application, but now I need to document it. Wouldn't it be great if I could plug an agent in that could help me with the documentation and capture that to say, oh, it was originally given a sort of broad scope of build me this application, to have something that then captures that and documents it. So I think that those, again, team of agents is the way that there will be able to plug that back in, and the process is much more fluid. The SDLC used to be a very regimented, you always started with requirements, you always had this PRD, you always had a testing cycle. Those lines are much blurrier now and will continue to get more so. So I think that's going to be really critical.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think that you could have your test suite developed autonomously and realize like, oh, I didn't realize the app actually did that. Now, I think with context engineering, people are really kind of getting more control over what the output of agentic coding is. But not everyone knows how to do context engineering well.
Right.
It's kind of an emerging skill set. And we all know that AI has a propensity to hallucinate. So I do think this validation step is going to be a very interesting space for us to explore in the quality arena, but also, like you said, all sorts of documentation to kind of tell you after the fact what's actually been developed.
We've talked a bit about how humans will collaborate in AI, especially as autonomy starts moving up the ladder. I think that's an area has some angst, has some unknowns. How do you see that starting to unfold? How do you see humans collaborating with these AI systems, particularly around autonomous testing?
Especially in testing, right? It's all about control. And if you're giving AI more control, that is going to feel uncomfortable to a lot of people. So just like we've seen with other tasks, and we've been talking about coding, it could be about writing, creative writing. The actual task of reading and writing, AI is really good at. Mm-hmm. So if it can read your user requirements and write your first set of tests, right? Your first set of usability tests from those requirements, and it can do that for you as a jumping off point, and then you can go in and correct them, delete some, approve some, and improve some, according to how you want to. Similarly, allowing humans to stop and trigger kind of activities, it's this notion that we see moving across all sorts of functions in the workplace, where those time-consuming repetitive tasks that you might need to do can increasingly be done by some kind of AI-enabled or agentic system, but the humans triggering them. Mm-hmm. That's how you begin. As you move up and the trust grows, trust obviously being critically important between the human and the agentic or AI-powered or even autonomous system, the human starts granting higher and higher order permission to the system to do things. Like, when you think it's right, delete some tests. When you think it's right, update the tests or create some more tests. I don't need to trigger that now, but maybe I need to be notified. And so I think that we'll see, if we take the paradigm of development, there's going to be companies who embrace that at different rates. Mm-hmm. There's going to be individuals who embrace that at different rates. There are really great developers who have fully switched over to, basically becoming context engineers, right? I barely code, I just give it all the context, I validate the output, and they were world-class engineers. And there's still some engineers who are reticent to do that because they feel like what they're working on is too sensitive or too complex. And who knows, like where people and organizations and teams will fall along that spectrum and how quickly they'll evolve individually. I think we'll see similar levels of willingness to jump and collaborate with and then pass over more and more authority to agentic systems. In other words, I think that people will probably be more of a gate to how quickly non-code-based testing moves up the autonomy ladder than technology. And I say that with more confidence now based on some of the stuff we've been doing recently. But let me flip the question on to you a bit and ask, it's one thing to collaborate with it, but let's assert that at some point in the future, people are using highly autonomous testing systems. How are they going to keep them accountable? How do you ensure that you don't run into that black box problem?
Yeah, it's going to be critical. And I think what it really starts with is full transparency and accountability in terms of an audit trail, to be able to see very clearly what systems executed, what did they do, what were the steps, capturing the thinking along the way, as well as having recording. And that's one of the things that we've really leaned into in the labs as we've started working on this, is to make sure that you can go back so that you can understand clearly what happened in the test, which is useful for historical record. It's useful for fine-tuning. Why did that test fail? What exactly happened? Helping do root cause analysis for failures, or for fine-tuning the test. Oh yeah, that didn't quite do things the way we wanted them to be done. That's not a real failure. That should be, we should adjust the intent a little bit here. We should adjust the approach.
That's actually one of my favorite things in some of these agentic systems that we have, is seeing them talk to each other. This back and forth between kind of one agent that said, hey, I just ran this test and it failed. And then kind of a more senior agent comes along and says, well, let me have a look at that. And they have a back and forth to try and figure out exactly what you said. It's pretty amazing to see, but it's very helpful to see it in English. You can actually see how it's figuring out the problem. And you also mentioned something there which it's kind of an old-fashioned idea for some. I personally think it's going to get more important as we get more autonomous. You said you need an audit trail. You need to store it all somewhere. And so the importance of a system of record is, I think, is going to remain. I mean, it's very important today, but if anything, it might even grow.
Yeah.
Because if you need to have this auditable history of what did the autonomous system do, then you've got to have a system of record, right?
Right, absolutely. And being able to then have the arbitrage and just to say, yeah, how did things evolve over time? And there are two different places. I mean, you sometimes see this now with, you've got this feature definition and that feature definition, and they're sometimes, you have to really be able to look at both of them, understand where they came from, and then you can empower, again, humans to make the final decision about, oh, this is what we really want to have happen. And so, yeah, I think that absolutely flows very naturally, and to your point, will become even more important as time goes on. What would you say to QA and engineering leaders about how should they be preparing for what's coming?
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest, first of all, you've got to understand what's out there. And I think there's a ton of innovation. So just do the research and understand what's actually possible today. I think people will be surprised. The second thing is you can't just jump, right? You have a way of doing things now. You have a team and an organization and a set of processes that are working to some level with you. And I think what I would recommend is to kind of do that. Well, where are we now and where do we want to be? And without wishing to kind of sound reductive, like, who wouldn't want to have a much higher level of autonomy? Because really what that translates to is a higher level of velocity and more functional coverage of your applications, a higher degree of confidence that your applications will really work, will really achieve their business objectives for your real users.
Right.
So if you can do that at the same scale as you're developing your applications, rather than having to trade off all that velocity that you gained in your coding because you've got this big bottleneck in your testing, or release stuff that's just not properly tested.
Yeah.
Right? Why live with that when you don't have to? So I think it's understand the state of the art and then figure out your strategy to get from where you are today to where you want to be. And I would say today, not everyone's going to want to go as high up that ladder as they can.
Right.
They may want to have, though, kind of a phased approach to get there. But I think there's a very practical way to do that. Bridges, thank you very much for talking to me today. And I am excited to see where we go with this. I think it's a powerful concept. Love what you're doing.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, Dan. And I'm also excited to see as customers start adopting some of the new things coming out of our labs. Looking forward to what they have to say.